Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for a threat briefing on technology industry. In today's conversation, we will be offering actionable intelligence based off the research of our Trustwave SpiderLabs team. My name is Julie Vickery-Kirsten. I'm the Global Events and Marketing Manager here at Trustwave, and I will be your host. I'd like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items so you can get the most out of today's session. If you are viewing this session live, our viewer platform allows you to customize your viewer screen. Feel free to adjust the size and positioning of the different windows to accommodate your liking. We do recommend that you use Chrome as the browser of choice. If you have any problems with the audio or session delivery, I always recommend that you hit refresh. We promise you will not need to re-log in, and the system should overcome any connectivity issues. Today's webinar will include both a presentation and a question and answer session. You will find the questions window in your webinar screen, and we encourage you to enter questions as you think of them throughout the presentation, and we will address as many as possible at the end. Lastly, today's presentation will be recorded, and we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone with a link to that recording. A copy of the recording will be made available on demand on our website for future reference. Before we dive in, I would like to welcome our security expert who will be presenting today, Carl Siegler. Carl is a 20-year InfoSec veteran responsible for research and analysis of current vulnerabilities, malware, and threat trends at Trustwave. In addition to maintaining the threat intelligence program, Carl and his team manage IDS IPS signature development, serve as a liaison with Microsoft MAP, and coordinate with the Trustwave's responsible vulnerability disclosure program. Tongue tie this morning. Without further ado, let's get started. Carl, over to you.
Thank you so much, Julie. That is a lot to say. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be going through the technology threat landscape based off the threat report that we just released yesterday. So without further ado, let's just dig in. So this shouldn't be any surprise to anybody here. Cyber attacks are still massive. They are still causing a massive amount of revenue loss for organizations. These are just some of the headlines that we're talking about. And we've had a bunch of these threat reports out. It's going back to August. So we're doing industry deep dives, things like the education sector, utility sector, manufacturing, retail. This specific threat report is on technology, which is a very, very broad category. Specifically, we're primarily talking about telcos and ISPs, software vendors, and to a slight extent, hardware vendors as well, where it applies to things like IoT technology. So we can see here organizations that provide technology solutions or services, they're getting breached themselves. Okta is a massive one. Okta was actually involved with the MGM compromise this past summer, or previous summer. Summer's coming back up again. The Sony breach, absolutely, and LastPass. Again, these are hacks that by targeting one specific organization, you affect every organization that uses that specific technology or service. So technology industry tends to be sort of two-sided in how it is affected by threat actors. And there are very specific, unique risks involved with the technology industry. First one being large attack surface. So there tends to be a very large attack surface when it comes to these technology organizations. They are getting larger and larger by the day with global growth, acquisitions, mergers, et cetera. A lot of these organizations are growing faster than they can apply security standards. So we see these organizations spreading to new countries, new continents. And as they're going to merge with other organizations, merge with other groups, hire new people in new territories. A lot of what's going missing there is the security element. And as as companies grow, they need to really consider not just the expansion and the speed of expansion, but also how they can apply security, even though it may slow that speed down a little bit. I know the board doesn't like to hear that. Complex supply chains. Supply chain compromises are massive these days. We call it the one ring to rule them all. So by targeting a supply chain organization, you get every organization that supplier supplies. We saw this sort of initially in brick and mortar with Target way back in the day, about a decade ago, where a contractor, a person got hired as a contractor to do HVAC services for Target. And that's how the contractor got into the Target organization. So rather than trying to embed themselves into the Target organization directly and rise up through the IT ranks, they just got hired as a HVAC cleaner, had access to the server room, was able to put the malware that they needed. That got spread out to every single Target branch. Now, we've heard about this with SolarWinds a little bit more recently, where SolarWinds themselves were compromised, a malicious patch was pushed out, and every SolarWinds customer was potentially affected by that. With technology, the supply chain becomes a little bit more complex because a lot of times these technology companies are the supply chain, right? These are ISPs, these are SolarWinds providing software to organizations. So not only are technology organizations working with other businesses, B2B, that are helping them with their business, but they are also the supplier for a lot of other businesses. They could be that chink in the armor. So they need to be aware of both their suppliers and who they're supplying, which makes it a lot more complex. High value data. These are companies that work with some of the most important governments and organizations in the world. So the data they have access to is extremely high value. It could be org charts of organizations, corporate espionage, or even as simple as credit card numbers and PI information of VIPs or people with access to a lot of revenue. Communications backbone. We talked about ISPs and telcos. They're not just on the communications backbone, they generally control the communication backbone. And with that amount of bandwidth available, it opens them up to be both the source and target of distributed denial of service attacks. The one thing that DDoS really needs is a lot of bandwidth. These organizations have it aplenty. Tech savvy and remote workforce combined become a very unique risk. So we have organizations that are, again, software vendors. So we have a lot of software developers, telcos. We have a lot of network engineers, people that are in charge of switching technologies, things like that. We also have a situation where a lot of people are working from home these days. Post-pandemic, it really hasn't gone away. In fact, it's sort of expanded the flexibility of the workforce, made it more accessible to people, and allowed organizations to hire in territories that maybe they don't have a brick and mortar office. However, work from home does introduce a lot of risks. Now you have a sort of distributed perimeter. You have workers that are working from their own home networks that may have a lot of other devices on them that are vulnerable. They may be sharing the corporate laptop with their daughter who just needed to get their homework done for tonight and their tablet was dead. Those sorts of situations introduce a lot of risk and a lot of potentially very high risk just because of the nature of these at-home workers and the access that these at-home workers have. Good. And this is the technology report itself. That QR code will lead you right to the website. It is not a malicious QR code, trust me. I know I work in hacking, but trust me. We do see QR codes used quite a bit these days. We actually had a couple of blog posts out about phishing that use QR codes to bypass URL inspectors. But the QR code, when you take a look at it, will lead you to a malicious website. We're seeing that in physical situations too. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And down here are public transit, MARTA. They have big signs in every single station for you to download the MARTA app. And someone was going around with magnetic stickers with a different QR code and slapping them on all those signs. So when you scan that QR code, you actually went to their malicious site. So be careful QR codes. I can guarantee this one's safe though. So let's talk about some emerging and prominent trends in these technology areas. Third-party supplier risks. Okay, I mentioned this before. Supply chain issues when it comes to technology companies is a lot different. You've heard about the MOVEit hack, probably. The ransomware as a service group, CLOP, found a zero-day vulnerability in MOVEit. And by offering it to their affiliates had access to the zero-day and were able to compromise companies all over the world. Frankly, I'd never even heard of MOVEit until this zero-day came out. But it's a piece of software that allows large organizations to transfer large amounts of data to other organizations. This could be a large amount of contracts, databases that need to be shared, things like that. But you have a lot of very big organizations with big data needs using this software. So already you have a target base of high value data. Now you have a 0 day in that target base. This became really massive. 600 breaches when this was written. There are still organizations being breached today with this movement vulnerability, even though this is close to a year old and patches are already available. 3CX, voice over IP, was also really serious. This is a supplier providing voice over IP services to a lot of organizations, and they were actually compromised through two of their suppliers. And open source as well. We're seeing this quite a bit. Once supply chain kind of hits, and once automated, at least static scanning was available, a lot of threat actors are just going through open source code looking for vulnerabilities. That's why we're seeing bash vulnerabilities that were embedded in the code for close to 15 years, and people are just discovering them now. So a lot of threat actors are going back through old open source code looking for vulnerabilities, knowing that a lot of other software uses those specific libraries. So we've seen this quite a bit, and this will continue to be a trend in the industry. Innovation, speed versus security. So a lot of organizations push out technology, push out services without clearly addressing some of the security concerns with those services. And a lot of times this has to do with speed to market. Security, as we know, can slow things down. Things need to be inspected, need to be analyzed, need to be audited. And the people that are looking at that bottom line don't necessarily like the board of no, which a lot of times what InfoSec is called. But if you do not apply these practices in the services and software that you're providing, you're going to be putting your clients at risk. Air Canada, they actually were using generative AI, ChatGPT, to provide information for them. But AIs hallucinate. We've seen lawyers that quote case studies that they got from ChatGPT that were completely made up. So using AI, new tool, a lot of people are really interested in using it, but they're using it too quickly without really inspecting what it's going to be doing. We've seen source code leaked that was improperly uploaded to specific AI instances. Even home-brewed AIs, if you're trying to develop your own LLM from a base LLM in-house, can leak information to other departments that you may not be aware of. So before you implement new technologies, really think carefully about how they're going to be implemented and what potential security risks that could involve. So from a mitigation standpoint, definitely make sure that every single your software development lifecycle actually has security processes built into it. It's not an afterthought or an audit after development. And make sure that you're just doing ongoing assessment and scanning of all of those services, all of that code that you are providing for your specific customers. And ransomware. Ransomware hasn't gone away. It's the number one type of malware, family of malware. It will continue to be for the foreseeable future. The reason for that is it works. It works very, very well. It works very well for getting money, leveraging money out of organizations. The three top actors here, and these are ransomware as a service groups, right? So Lockbit 3.0. Hopefully they are not as popular as they were. Lockbit had an international takedown of their servers, their primary website for leaking information, etc. But when it comes to takedowns of these ransomware type groups or exploit kit groups or any of these as a service groups that are actually very large organizations that are spread disparately through many countries, most likely, a takedown's never going to make them completely go away. What they're trying to do is cripple the organization enough that they fall too low and nobody really wants to affiliate with them anymore. And this is what happened with Lockbit. When the servers were taken down, the head of Lockbit came out with a public statement saying, yeah, they got me, but it wasn't really that big a deal, and we're coming back stronger than ever. Will they? It seems like they're doing a lot of damage control right now to try and keep their affiliates in check, and that's how they make their money. So if I am a criminal and I want to push ransomware out, I may subscribe to Lockbit. I will get their exploit kits. I will get their ransomware. I will compromise an organization. Whatever money I get out of that organization, Lockbit takes 10, 20% off the top. I get the rest of that money. But that's how Lockbit makes their money, by taking a cut off of all the other actors while keeping their hands out of the actual breaches themselves. They're still considered enablers, but this is still against the law, so it's not really a loophole. Clop is another group. I mentioned that with MoveIt. They found a zero-day vulnerability in MoveIt, and that's why their affiliates were able to compromise so many organizations with that vulnerability. And Alfie Black Hat, number 3, a big up-and-comer, really, really popular out there. You may recognize Alfie and Black Hat, Alfie/Black Hat, depending on whom you talk to, with the MGM breach. So when MGM was compromised last summer, shut down their operations for close to a week internationally. This was a group called Scattered Spider, which was an affiliate of Alfie Black Hat. So they're using Alfie Black Hat's tools and ransomware to infect MGM. And what they actually gained access to through social engineering some Okta credentials was access to their virtual servers, the ESXi servers themselves. So they weren't just encrypting data, they were encrypting entire virtual systems, the entire servers themselves, which apparently didn't have very good backups and had never been really tested, as evidenced by the fact that I think they're still trying to fix certain things from that compromise. So Lockbit, Clop, Alfie, Black Hat are the top big ones. You see others here. Medusa's pretty big. Black Bass does seem to be dying down a little bit, but may come back. It's hard to know what's going to happen after Lockbit has been sort of spread out. Good. From ransomware mitigation perspective, keep backups of your important data segmented off of the same network that system's on. Practice your recovery. Don't just assume you have good backups and don't try to recover them. And make sure you're just monitoring for just new techniques that these groups are using. Double extortion is still in play. It's the primary method that they use to extort money out of organizations. And with double extortion, what they're doing is twofold. One, they're installing the malware to encrypt your important data and then trying to extort you to get the key to get that data back. Right? The second way they get money out of people is to exfiltrate data, keep it on their servers, and if you don't want to pay the money for decrypting your data, if you don't need that key, if you have good backups and you don't feel that it's going to be that big a deal to recover, okay, that's fine. You know what? You still need to pay us because otherwise we're going to leak your customer database. We're going to leak your employee organization. We're going to leak your strategies for the next quarter. Things like that will compel an organization to pay that ransom. So they're exfiltrating, then they're encrypting. And that's working very, very well for them. It's a multi-billion-dollar a year criminal industry. So let's talk about the attack flow. So when we're talking about attack flow, this is sort of a generalized view of what an attack chain or attack flow looks like, targeting any industry, any organization. A threat actor is going to get an initial foothold on some sort of asset, whether that's a VPN gateway or some administrator's laptop, doesn't matter, just needs to get a foot in the door. Then they're going to use some initial payloads. It could be locally built tools. It could be tools that they use and pull down from the internet. But they need some of their tools, some of their initial tools, to start grabbing their other tools and start moving around inside the network. They're then going to start to expand and pivot through the network, getting more access. Because that VPN gateway, that laptop from some low-level employee, that's not the data they want. They need to pivot and laterally move to the data they want, which is stored on the mail servers, the database servers, your CRM servers, payroll, things like that. Once they're on the systems that they actually desire, then they're going to start deploying that malware. And this is their main malware. This is typically going to be ransomware, but it may not be. It could be a RAT, a remote access toolkit. It could be just destructive DDoS. They could just overwrite the entire hard drive with zeros, or you know, uh, destroy slash from root on down. And then we may see some exfiltration post-compromise activity based on the threat actor themselves and what they're actually trying to accomplish. Um, like I said, with ransomware, which is again the most popular malware out there, this is going to be twofold. They will exfiltrate important data and then try to use that post-compromise to extort money out of you. And again, these are a lot of the threat actors. We were talking about those ransomware threat actors. There's other threat actors out there. We have nation state threat actors, other threat actors that are not ransomware as a service as well. And then the individual threat tactics that these actors use to take advantage of the risks that you put yourself at. Phishing and business email compromise, still the #1 method to get into an organization. Phishing is typically used for an initial foothold, where business email compromise is a whole different situation where the threat actors pretend to be somebody very important at the organization, typically a member of the C board, maybe a CFO, and they send an email to a lower level team member that's very urgent, very compelling to get them to perform some action they wouldn't normally do. Typically, the type of scenario would be that the CFO is stuck in the Singapore airport. Their phone is dead. They only had access to this one messaging thing. They missed their flights, and it is absolutely urgent that they get this wire transfer to this bank account within the next half hour, or they're going to lose a major deal. And then, if you are that person's team member, they're your manager, they're telling you exactly what to do. It's their name, it's coming from their email because they've been compromised. You may be compelled to actually do that. You may be compelled to transfer money to somebody else's account. This happens all the time. Business email compromise is responsible for multiple billions of dollars a year that are stolen from organizations through just this technique. AI-driven malicious email campaigns, we're seeing this quite a bit. ChatGPT and the like are large language models that try to emulate human speech. So of course they're being used quite a bit in phishing campaigns. Scam campaigns, very similar. Data brokers and access brokers, a very, very common method of getting access to an organization. They'll just buy credentials off the dark web. Hey, I'm looking for credentials for T-Mobile. Can you, does anybody have some for sale? Misconfigured applications and services, we see this quite a bit. Some people may set up a system as an emergency fix, as a Band-Aid. Our VPN was down. I just had to set up the separate server so that people can't get in. But then when everything's fixed, we're going to move back. And then they don't. They leave that server that's unpatched, installed with just default settings, and they leave it intact. This is how server sprawl occurs. This is how threat actors get in. And then DDoS attacks are typically used to either cripple an organization, shut down their services, or maybe distract security resources, trying to deal with the DDoS attack while the threat actors are getting away with something else while you're distracted by that. So let's talk about that initial foothold, phishing, scams, and spam. So again, phishing is the #1 method that threat actors use to get into organizations. 95% of all the compromises that we see, that initial chink was a phishing email that was opened. Either an attachment was opened or a link was clicked on in the email itself. And this makes sense because it's, at least it should be, a lot easier to patch software than it is to patch humans, right? And humans typically want to help people. If somebody is asking you for some help, they need some information about XYZ, they're really lost in doing something, they really need something to occur right now, people want to help. And that's why phishing and social engineering attacks are still so effective to this day. We're seeing a lot of those AI-driven emails as well. Like I said, ChatGPT and the like are large language models. They're meant to emulate natural language, and natural language in multiple languages. I was doing a ChatGPT presentation for an organization that works in South Africa. And I used ChatGPT in a demo just to show how to translate a phishing email from English into Afrikaans. And the audience was extremely impressed with the knowledge of the language and how it translated. What is the number one red flag that we typically have for phishing attacks? Clumsy grammar, misspelling, poor punctuation. Things that will sort of tip the hand that the writer is possibly English as a second language. ChatGPT helps a lot with that. And we're seeing it quite a bit. We're seeing a lot of phishing emails that are pretty obviously generated by AI. It's a serious concern and something you should be aware of. It should be a part of your security awareness training so that your users know that that's not the only red flag they should be looking for. Um, Software development and coding platforms as phishing URLs, we see this quite a bit. So a lot of these phishers, in order to push out a malicious URL, use redirectors that are generally public. This could be redirectors through things like Google Drive, through various email programs. And it looks like it's coming from Microsoft's cloud services or Amazon or Google or something like that. So it has a sense of authenticity because it seems to be coming from a major vendor, but actually it's a threat actor that's piggybacking on those cloud services to make you think that it's more trustworthy than it actually is. Cryptocurrency, I mentioned QR code phishing, quishing, they're calling it now. Quishing, smishing, and phishing. Too many of these. Too many. Stop. When we look at attachments, and you can see that in the chart in the upper right-hand corner there, it used to be that Microsoft documents, Office documents, were the number one attachment that we would see that were malicious. This stopped about 2 years ago when Microsoft disabled macros in Office by default. After that, threat actors just changed their techniques. They went with PDFs for a little while. Now they've moved almost specifically to HTML attachments. And this has been a massive trend for the past 6 months. We're seeing a lot of these phishing campaigns using this technique. Why HTML? A lot of people think HTML is safe. I just got an email this morning where the image signature of the person who sent the email to me, the image was taken out and then added as an HTML file to the email itself. So we get email all the time where HTML is attached to it, often because of our mail servers themselves. A lot of people think that HTML is just plain text anyway. It's really not a big deal to open it. But HTML contains scripting. You can do JavaScripting, Visual Basic scripting. HTML can actually embed code in itself and then decode the code that's embedded in it. This is called HTML stuffing, or they're stuffing malware in the HTML code itself to be decoded at the site and not be inspected by or bypass inspection by gateways like email gateways, etc. So we'll continue to see this. Definitely include that in your security awareness training as well. Beware of HTML attachments. Initial payload. So after they've gotten access to the system, that poor new user that really didn't pay attention that hard to security awareness training is already overwhelmed with their second week at the organization. They open up an attachment they shouldn't have, and now they're infected with some malware. So the threat actor has this foothold on this system, but that's not what they want. Again, they want to go to your valuable data, the database servers, the mail servers, etc. So they need to get off of this system and onto other systems, and for that, they're going to need some of their tools. Now, some of their tools are going to be just built into the that initial foothold. A lot of threat actors are going to piggyback on top of valid tools that we see in every single Windows platform, which is the most popular platform in organizations that are compromised, right? And we see tools like PowerShell, WeMic being used by these threat actors because, again, they are valid tools and they are tools that you can expect to see on most Windows stations if they're not locked down. Other times, they may trick the user into doing the actions for them because the user behind the keyboard is authorized. That may be part of the phishing campaign. Don't just open that word attachment, but also you need to do XYZ after opening it up. And then some threat actors will actually download their own toolkits. This is where you'll see things like Goot loader and some of these loader programs. And the purpose of those programs are to download malware in a very obfuscated way to bypass any of your anti-malware solutions at the perimeter and get it to this specific endpoint. So that may be another tool, but again, a lot of these threat actors will just use the tool the organization's already using, just the built-in PowerShell, probably to go under the wire and be a little bit more stealthy. Now that they have this initial foothold, they're going to try and pivot to their initial foothold in their toolkit. They're going to pivot to those valued servers. One method that is being used quite a bit is just credential access. This could be downloading credentials from an access broker. This could be accessing existing data dumps and looking for password reuse because somebody reused their Facebook password for their company password. This could be actually looking on the system itself. Our threat hunt team sees this quite a bit, which surprised me, although nothing should surprise me in this day and age. A lot of administrators, network admins, people that work in IT use a lot of scripting files, Python, Ruby, Bash, you name it, PowerShell. And they set up these automated scripts to do various tasks. A lot of those automated scripts have hard-coded credentials embedded into the script so they can access remote resources without having to be prompted for a password. And those passwords are stored in those scripts in clear text. So the first thing our threat hunters do whenever they hit any single system is take a look through for any scripts that may be existing already. More likely than not, often, I think they said sometimes up to 75% of the time, they'll find clear text credentials right there that they can piggyback on top of. Some lateral movement will occur just by exploiting new systems. You now have an initial foothold inside the perimeter, which means you'll be able to see assets that were not available to you from the public internet. So now you can redouble your scanning techniques, look for specific vulnerabilities that you may be able to exploit now from the inside. Maybe vulnerabilities that weren't patched because people thought that they're on the inside, it's protected by a firewall. We don't need to patch that system yet. We see that all the time. And again, from the inside, those threat actors can see a lot more. And then persistence techniques, how do they stay on these systems? Sometimes this is account manipulation. They take over an existing account or they create an account for themselves. Typically, though, what they're going to do to maintain access, especially for the malware that they're putting on the systems, is to just set up something in the registry to make sure that that service resets itself, restarts whenever the system restarts, like any other service that would on the system. So monitoring your systems for registry changes like that, things like that, will help you identify these compromises before they get any further than they already have. Good, and ransomware. Mentioned it quite a bit before, so I'm not going to beat this one to death, but ransomware threats are just increasing. The threat actors are getting more bold. There was a time when threat actors wouldn't touch various organizations. For instance, during the pandemic, healthcare was sort of left alone. Occasionally, if a hospital or healthcare agency came in the crosshairs of a ransomware as a service organization, they'd make a public apology and release the keys for that organization. They wanted to be seen as the good guy hackers, thieves with honor or some other garbage. That's not the case anymore. They are more than happy to target hospitals, healthcare organizations. They do not care at all. In fact, the only real restriction that we tend to see is these threat actor groups being very, very careful on not compromising any organization in Russia or some Eastern Europe countries. That's kind of suspicious. But ransomware is just going to continue to increase. We're going to continue to see it. It's not going to go away. And the add-on of extortion as a primary element is making it much more effective for getting money out of these organizations. So it's profitable. Criminals don't like to give up profitable techniques. And just a note on this, I'll cover that in the next slide. Exfiltration and post-compromise. So again, when the data is exfiltrated, it can be used for extortion. That's the primary method we see being used. But sometimes the post-compromise is exfiltrating the data not to extort the customer, but to sell the data on the dark web. This is still very, very common, especially credentials, very, very popular on the dark web. Credit card numbers, personally identifiable information, personal healthcare information, PHI, all very popular packages to purchase and sell on the underground. When it comes to PHI, going back to the ransomware groups on the previous slide, that extortion has gotten very, very difficult for the healthcare industry in general. There's been a bunch of healthcare organizations and clinics that have been shut down by ransomware, specifically because they were not able to recover from the damage that occurred from the attack. My wife is a mental health counselor, and she was working a 1-800 type counseling line here in Georgia. And their organization was hit by ransomware, and they didn't care. They kept them locked down. And that organization is still struggling to get back up on its feet today. That was over 2 years ago. So it's vicious. In one case in Pennsylvania, the threat actors targeted a MRI and scanning organization. And what they exfiltrated out were the imaging photos of breast cancer patients with identifiable information. And they were going to leak that information out. They started leaking that information out until something happened behind the scenes where they stopped. Likely they were paid. But that organization ended up completely shutting down with threat of lawsuits from their patients. And then the legal hurdles, the compliancy laws, et cetera, it can be very, very deadly. So beware of that. Good. Some key recommendations and mitigations. Number one, focus on the human elements. I've mentioned this throughout this slide deck, but the human element is likely the most vulnerable chink in your armor. It's probably what's putting you most at risk. So make sure your security awareness training is up to date and is constantly updated for things like generative AI and new attacks that are occurring. Make sure that it's ongoing and repetitive. I see a lot of organizations that sort of gamify the security awareness training. Set something up where the person who identifies the phishing email the fastest maybe gets a gift card or something like that, and have those sort of things ongoing, just to get people interested in it. You also need to make sure that your employees feel like they have skin in the game. We saw this quite a bit when we were looking at hospitality risks. With hospitality, they have a lot of seasonal turnover of employees. For instance, in the summertime, they may have a lot more employees than they would in the winter if they are a resort at the beach. So they're going to hire a lot more workers, and those workers may only work for 2 or 3 months, and then they're gone. And then they're off to another job, or maybe they're off to college. They may never be back again. So for that 3-month period, how do you expect these employees to set strong passwords? How do you expect these employees to not do the most efficient, most easy way to get access to whatever they need to do their job, cutting security corners? So you need to be very, very aware of that. Make sure that your security awareness training is effective for all your users, and make sure that you understand what your user base is and what sort of training would be beneficial for them. Next one, protect the entry point, email. Phishing is the #1 way to get in. That's how they target that human element to the left. So make sure that your email is protected. Make sure that your security awareness training addresses phishing and spear phishing attacks directly. And make sure that you have anti-malware protection or an email gateway in place at the mail server. That way you can filter out potentially malicious emails before they even get to the inbox of the potential target. So email gateways are essential. Their techniques are constantly changing. It used to be that we were looking for malicious URLs. Now they're pushing QR codes out there. So now we need to analyze QR codes to see if it goes to a URL that is then malicious. So those techniques are constantly changing, and your technology solutions need to be as well. Prioritize vulnerability management and patching. We've been hammering this information for decades. And it's still true to this day, and it will continue to be true. Why aren't you people patching your servers? That's generally the criticism that is tossed out. And why does it take so long for patches to be put in place? In the case of MoveIt, it was a zero-day attack. It was affecting multiple huge corporations for millions of dollars. And yet still, 8 months later, people are getting compromised from it. They still haven't applied that patch, despite the high profile and despite the risk. There are reasons for this. Patching is very, very difficult and a lot more complex than most people realize. We have globally disparate organizations, and trying to patch a system that is maybe in a different time zone. Maybe the local person that has access doesn't even speak your native language, and you have to work through a translator or maybe reschedule for a time when language or communication isn't an issue. You have issues with servers for all. People set up a virtual system and test a little bit and then forget to take it down. People shut down systems, but forget to unplug it from the network. And then the next time the switch is rebooted, it reboots the server as well. So it's extremely important to get a handle on these things. And the way you get a handle on your vulnerability management and patching is to do inventory on your assets. You can't secure things if you don't know what you have. So make sure that you're scanning for new assets, doing your network scans, you're from the public internet scans. Make sure you know exactly what's on your network, what is live, what it's running, and who has access to it. This is how you're going to have to start. Now, I know that's a very, very large problem to solve, but if you can't solve what assets you have, you're not going to be able to solve what's vulnerable and what patches are needed. The way I generally recommend performing inventory is start with your most valued systems. Don't scan your entire user net. Scan your DMZ. Scan the network that has your mail servers and your database servers. Those are probably your most valued assets with the most valuable data. Start there, prioritize them first, and then work down through your lower value assets. Which brings to the bottom left, inventory and triage key assets and suppliers. You can't prioritize vulnerability management and patching if you don't have that. Okay. And it's not just inventorying your assets, but also, like it says there, your suppliers as well. Supply chain attacks are very much in vogue. So whatever suppliers you're using for software, for services, even physical services, make sure that you've done some sort of security verification or confirmation for that vendor that the services they're providing are secure and not introducing risk. The bottom middle one there is something that I really want to emphasize. Build effective response processes. I see too many organizations that focus all of their budget and resources on defensive mechanisms, anti-malware, firewalls, IDS, security awareness training, things like that. Make sure that you're also paying attention to your response processes. If your web server gets breached today, what are you going to do? What's the first thing that you do? That is your response procedure for that specific scenario. And you should have a response procedure for every potential scenario that would be hard hitting for your organization. Practice them, keep them updated, work on them, and don't let them just go to die. Don't let them die on the vine. Dwell time is devastating for organizations. So the longer a threat actor stays on a network and dwells on a network, the more damage they cause, the more embedded they become. So if you have proper response mechanisms where you can put in place immediately proper segmentation, auditing, the forensics to really dig down and build a timeline for the attack, a lot of times you can stem that bleeding right then and there before the threat actor gets much further. But if nobody knows what they're doing, if you find out that your website has been compromised or suddenly an anti-malware signature is triggering for some ransomware family, and everybody is just calling each other, I don't know what to do. Where's Jason right now? That's not going to help you. That is not going to help you. It's going to cause problems. So start practicing those now before it becomes a problem. I really highly recommend tabletop exercises. Doesn't really involve a lot of planning. Just get your key people into a room or into a Zoom chat and do a tabletop exercise for just that scenario. What would happen right now if our web server got breached? What would we do first? What's our first step? And probably you're going to get a lot of different answers. So see if you can streamline that and get everybody on the same page. Finally, conduct threat monitoring and hunting. So ongoing threat hunting and monitoring is very, very important because again, you may already be compromised and not know it. So the defensive mechanisms you put in place are very important, but if they get bypassed, you cannot prepare for a 0 day. That's why it's called a 0 day. Having ongoing threat hunting and monitoring your networks, hunting for those IOCs you see coming out, malicious IP addresses, malicious hashes, malicious file names, registry keys. Start hunting for those throughout your entire network. Look on your valued systems to see if those IOCs exist. Did that IP address visit your mail server recently? You should know. This will help you identify a compromise before it gets any further than it already has. Again, dwell time is deadly. I think the average dwell time for a threat actor on a network is anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And a lot of times the organization finds out the threat actors on their network through some third party. Law enforcement calls them and says, hey, there's been some fraud associated with your accounts. The bank calls and says, hey, your entire Germany account was completely drained and sent over to China. You should definitely know these things ahead of time. Good. Oh, and this busy slide is about how incredible SpiderLabs is, and we're awesome. I'm not gonna bore you with all of this, but yeah, we do quite a lot. Pen tests, digital forensics, incident response. My team is responsible for threat intelligence and threat research. I'm also the editor for SpiderLabs blog, which is very popular out there. We actually just had a blog post 2 days ago about generative AI and phishing. So if you haven't checked out our blog, definitely do. We keep at least 1 or 2 articles a week up there on a diverse amount of trends. Good. And with that said, I will go ahead and take any questions from the audience.
All right. Well, thank you, Carl. That was great, as always. And just a reminder to everybody that you will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording via email by the end of the week, along with a link to download the briefing. And if you're interested in learning more about today's topic, you can submit a question by clicking on the mail icon at the bottom of your screen. So yeah, at this point, we have had a number of questions come in, but please continue submitting them, and we'll get to as many as we can before the end of the hour. All right, Carl, you ready? All right, first question. How can we ensure that the recommended mitigations suggested align with our existing framework and strategies? And do you have any tips for working with the board to get buy-in?
That's always difficult, right? Getting the board to get buy-in or expanding what you're doing right now. I would say integrating some of these recommendations with what you're doing currently is just looking at my recommendations, the recommendations that have been talked to here, and see how they could actually either supplement your existing policies and procedures, or maybe even supplant some of those procedures to make yourself more secure. The whole point here is not 100% security. The whole point here is to constantly reduce risk and not let risk increase. So if any of these mitigations sound to you like they would help you address some of the risk in your organization, map that out. Explain exactly what that risk is and how these procedures or new techniques or new products or new software, services, whatever, how these are going to help address that specific need, how it's going to reduce that risk even further than you currently have. One thing that I've always recommended for organizations, and I say this with a grain of salt, a lot of IT professionals, especially in InfoSec, love to scare the seaboard, talk about the doom and gloom scenarios. And I am not a big fan of that. Generally, I find that it bites you more than it helps you when it comes to getting budget. But that doesn't mean that you can't explain the current threat landscape properly to your seaboard. You don't necessarily have to say, look at this $500 million compromise. That's going to be us next if you don't do what I say. You don't have to go there. But what I've done in the past is set up a Google alert for compromises, breaches, hacks in the industry I was working in. And then whenever a major story comes across, I just send it to my team as an educational component. Hey, everybody, this is what I want you to be aware of. This just happened to a company that we're competing with. It could happen to us. And copy the seaboard in on that to show that you're being proactive with your staff, but also keeping them educated about what's going on. And whenever you have those meetings about budget, always prepare a specific solution a specific budget that you need for that solution, and what it's going to accomplish in your organization. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Let's see. Next question is, do the actionable suggestions mentioned differ based on the size or scope of my technology company?
Oh, that's a good question. Absolutely. Yeah, sure. And it's a hard thing because it's a double-edged sword. Generally, I find that the smaller an organization is, just naturally, the less complex they are, right? If you're a small little mom and pop shop, you probably only have a tiny little network. It's based in one geographic location. And given the low complexity of that network and those systems and those services, it's probably a lot easier to lock down and secure. The problem with that is those small organizations generally don't have the human resources, the budget, or the money to do so. So we see a lot of those small organizations, they hire somebody who's, they're all in one trade master IT person that does security too, and networking and server maintenance and everything else. So that's the problem on the small side. On the enterprise side, on the large organization side, you have the opposite problem, right? You have resources. Oh, so many resources. You see resources being wasted every day in your organization, but you can't get some of those resources. The problem with those large organizations is just how complex they are. They have the resources to implement security, probably in a very good way, definitely better than they're probably doing right now. However, the complexity of multiple countries being globally disparate with multiple languages, time zones, different services needed by different organizations. Perhaps you just expanded to a country that will not let you use the mail server software that you use in every other country. Now you have to set up new mail server software. Complexity is the enemy of security. So I think it's difficult in both scenarios. It's difficult for small organizations to implement security correctly or implement these recommendations because they're so small and generally don't have those resources. On the flip side, the organizations that do have those resources tend to be so large and complex that implementing those strategies properly is the problem they need to overcome.
Okay. See, we've got two more questions. Okay. How do the challenges mentioned, specifically complex supply chains, remote workforces, affect the effectiveness of traditional security measures?
The effectiveness, quite a bit, right? So when we think about traditional security measures, we think about things like firewalls, proper network segmentation, things like that. Those basic best practices, those traditional measures, and we say traditional measures like they're like an old school thing. And now we have these new measures that we put in place. And it's not necessarily true that way. The effectiveness of those basic best practices are harder to implement because of the complexities I mentioned. So the complexities of the supply chains, remote workforces, those are new complexities for this day and age, which make implementing firewall access control lists properly a lot more difficult, applying patches a lot more difficult. But it doesn't change those practices. Those practices still are needed. And this is why a lot of the advice that we've been giving are the same advice that we've been giving since the 90s. Make sure that your networks are properly segmented. Make sure that you have good authentication procedures in place that use multi-factor authentication. Make sure that you are auditing the most valued data, access in, access out, and auditing for anything that is anomalous. These are things that we've been discussing since the 90s, and those recommendations haven't changed. They are still going to help you this day. Why aren't they being done, even though we've been talking about it for 3 decades? Because of complexity. And when we see these new little bits of complexity, this entropy being tossed into the mix, like complex supply chain attacks, like everybody working from home because we have bandwidth to do so now, we have to readdress how to implement those basic best practices properly across those new risks.
All right. Last question that came in. Given the emphasis on proactive identification and prevention within the attack cycles, can you elaborate on the role of threat intelligence sharing and collaboration within the tech industry?
Absolutely. I love threat intelligence. It was my first job here at Trustwave over a decade ago, and it's changed dramatically in the time that I've been working in data science and threat intelligence. Back when I was starting, organizations held on to their intel very closely to their chest, right? This is IP. This is my property, and I'm not going to share that with anybody else. Um, as things got more complex, as we got into the 2000s, et cetera, the 2010s, and here we are in the 20s. Oh Lord. Um, at that point, it's going to be a lot harder to identify threats in your organization with just your view of the internet and the threats that are out there. Very quickly, people found out that they just had a very small view of what was going on internationally, globally, from a network perspective. So sharing threat intelligence has become almost common in this day and age. In fact, you can find all sorts of open source threat intelligence feeds that you can import for free today, including threat intelligence platforms that are open source and free that you can implement today to start ingesting some of those open source threat intelligence feeds. What this gives you is a broader insight into global trends and current actions being taken by threat actors. This is where you're going to see the current list of malicious IP addresses that may be attacking you, the current list of hashes for malicious for malware that's out there, new ransomware families. You're not going to know this unless you're ingesting threat intelligence in some form or fashion. In this day and age, I would say, even if it's not formalized, even if you're just monitoring Twitter and email for occasional IOCs that come out that affect your industry and then use those IOCs, do at least that. Because threat intelligence is essential to do that active threat hunting, the monitoring of your networks for what's malicious, and auditing your networks to see if you've actually been compromised. If you don't know what is currently compromising other organizations out there, you're not going to see it when it hits you.
All right. That's it for questions. If you guys have any additional questions that come in mind before we close out, feel free to submit them, and we will be sure to have Carl or one of our security experts follow up with you. And as a reminder, you will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording via email by the end of the week. And if you're interested in learning more about today's topic, you can submit a question by clicking the mail icon at the bottom of your screen. Before you leave, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to fill out the post-show survey to rate this session. You can view that below as well. You will also be prompted to take the survey at the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you, Carl. That was great. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, everybody, for your time today. Again, I hope you found this informative, and if you have any questions, please reach out to us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.